Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sarah Vaughn, brand leader for Remind. Our mission here at Remind is to advance the business of psychedelics responsibly and ethically. And if you are new, please sign up for our newsletters. We provide special reports, interviews with industry leaders, and host in-person events and webinars throughout the year. And today, we're going to be diving into the latest developments in Colorado's National Medicine Health Act. We have three outstanding expert speakers who have been watching this process very closely. They'll be sharing their insights, but if you have any questions, enter them right here in LinkedIn, and they'll field as many as possible. Josh Hardman will be moderating the conversation. He is the founder and editor of Psychedelic Alpha, the industry's go-to source for news and analysis, and also strategic advisor to Remind. Please welcome Josh, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So thanks for joining us. As many of you on this call will know, I think nearly a year and a half ago, Colorado voters endorsed the Natural Medicine Health Act under Prop 122. And this is really exciting because it's the second regulated access pathway to psychedelics in the US. But it's also daunting for people like me who are trying to keep up with not only all the drug development, all the clinical research, but also the policy reform. And I'm trying to do that on a worldwide basis. As you can hear, I'm from Britain. I spend most of my time in England. Luckily, there's not much going on here, at least from a coverage point of view. But just keeping up with what's going on in the US alone would be a full-time job. So we're lucky to be joined by Josh and Tasia here, two experts who are very close to the ground in terms of what's going on in Colorado. Before I ask them to introduce themselves, I just wanted to stress that we do intend to keep quite a bit of time at the end of this for Q&A. So do send your questions, and Sarah will collect those, and then she'll join us in the latter half of the call to put the questions to the three of us. But first, can Tasia and Josh, perhaps you can introduce yourselves. Let's start with you, Tasia.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being on, and thanks, Josh. My name is Tasia Poinsatte. I am the state director for the Healing Advocacy Fund, which is a nonprofit that supports safe, affordable, state-regulated access to psychedelic healing for all who need it. The nonprofit started in Oregon when they passed their psilocybin services measure in 2020, and has now been in Colorado since we passed Proposition 122 in November of 2022. And we are supporting the state in setting up the regulated model for psilocybin therapies, and also doing a lot of education to support basically the knowledge base for this change to go smoothly and well, support a responsible and ethical program. And then in addition to that role of Healing Advocacy Fund, I also worked on the campaign to pass Proposition 122.
Nice, thanks. Josh?
Yeah, thank you, Remind. Thank you, Sarah and Josh, and for everyone who's tuning in. My name is Joshua Kappel. I'm an attorney who practices law. I'm licensed in Colorado and California. I started the law firm Vicente LLP. We do a lot of work representing entrepreneurs and policy advocates in emerging industries. I also wear the hat of a senior policy advisor to Healing Advocacy Fund, where I work closely with Tasia on trying to make Colorado's program, responsible and inclusive and accessible. Before that, I was also one of the drafters of the Natural Medicine Health Act. Chaired the campaign committee, and really dedicated to making this program work. And so, excited to be here.
Thanks. And I have to try and remember to call you Joshua, because I think I probably have some childhood trauma, because every time I'm a Josh, and every time I'd hear Joshua, it was usually my mom screaming upstairs saying, "Joshua, come see." So maybe I need some natural medicine healing to deal with that, but I'll call you Joshua for today. So maybe both of you could start by telling us, what is the Natural Medicine Health Act, and also how it differs from what we've seen in Oregon. And you can go in whichever order you like.
Yeah, go for it, Tasia.
Sure. So the Natural Medicine Health Act was passed by voter ballot initiative in 2022. And the two main things it did, it removes criminal penalties for 5 naturally occurring psychedelic substances. That's a big difference from Oregon right there, including this pretty robust decriminalization piece. So it allows personal use, cultivation, and sharing of those compounds, which are psilocybin and psilocin, both occurring in mushrooms, as well as mescaline, excluding peyote, ibogaine, and DMT, which is in ayahuasca. So that's kind of the first big piece of what it did. But the other piece that we're really working on actively now is creating a regulated therapeutic model for psilocybin mushrooms, where people can go and receive access to psilocybin with the support of a trained facilitator who's going to be there with them throughout the psychedelic experience, and also help them prepare for that experience and integrate afterwards. The main thing we emphasize that it is not a dispensary model. So it is still illegal to sell any of these substances in Colorado for people to take home and use kind of on their own time.
Yeah, and I guess just to like add to that, I think like a couple of big key differences from Oregon is this personal use decrim model that allows people to possess these substances on their own and share them, not for any remuneration or for any profit, and also, the addition of multiple natural medicines and not just psilocybin. I mean, I think those are like the big key differences. And then, as we'll probably talk about, there's a lot of differences in sort of like the nuances of the regulations that are being developed.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that the decrim of those specific natural medicines is baked into the act itself is important, because in Oregon we're seeing psychedelics being swept up in this broader kind of backlash against drug decriminalization, right? Because I think all drugs, small amounts of all drugs were decriminalized under a separate measure, right? Measure 110. So yeah, I think it's an important difference, right? That they are explicitly decriminalized in the act, the Natural Medicine Health Act itself. So.
Yeah.
Correct. And it's a little bit of a different decrim than 110 as well, whereas Colorado, it's actually legal to possess these substances. So, if the law enforcement finds you with these substances, they're not going to issue you a ticket like in Oregon under 110, even though the ticket's like a petty offense. Here in Colorado, it's actually legal to possess and to cultivate them. So that's like a key difference in the types of decrim we have.
One other key thing to mention, it's only legal for people 21 and up. So the law didn't change for anyone under that age. And then I guess one other piece as well that is significant is that, so right now we're setting up the regulated program for mushrooms, but the other 3 psychedelic substances could be added to the regulatory program at a later date if the agencies choose to approve that.
Right, yeah. And that, just to recap, those were ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline, right?
Yeah. And not mescaline from peyote, so mescaline from San Pedro or other cactus species.
Yeah, for sure, that's helpful. So we've had this rulemaking process that's been going on for nearly 18 months, I guess, and it has to be ready by the end of this year because the program's set to launch in January the 1st. So tell us about that sort of timeline, what's been done so far, and then also explain these 2 frustratingly similarly named or acronymed agencies, DORA and DORA. I mean, what are their separate roles? And just give us an overview of that. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, and if you look at the Psychedelic Alpha tracker, there's 287 days, 12 hours, and 52 minutes until this program's supposed to be live. So that's sort of what we're working back from. So the regulated program, through Prop 122 was slightly modified in Senate Bill 23-290. So for those who are looking at, wanting to find the law of the land, make sure you look at Senate Bill 23-290. And what that did is it tasked 2 different agencies with regulating the natural medicine program. And so you have DORA, the Department of Regulatory Affairs, which regulates mostly licensed professions through their Division of Professional Occupations. I think it's 60-some professions they regulate, and they're tasked with regulating this new profession of facilitator or psychedelic facilitator. And then you have the Department of Revenue, which is, kind of as the name suggests, they do a lot on the taxing side, but they also regulate the cannabis industry and other businesses in Colorado. And so they're tasked with regulating the manufacturing, cultivation, testing, distribution, and healing centers. So you have these 2 agencies that are tasked with regulating different aspects of this program that really sort of like fall within their expertise. And then it's being guided by, the Act called for the creation of the Natural Medicine Advisory Board. So it's being guided by this Natural Medicine Advisory Board that has been putting in countless hours to make recommendations about what this program should look like. And those recommendations are going to both programs, or both agencies, both to DORA and to DOR. And so what we've seen over the last 12 months, 15 months, is that the Natural Medicine Advisory Board recently, in the last 3 months, came out with their official recommendations. And it covered most of the topics, but not all. They reserved some topics, to still be discussed, including locations where natural medicine services can take place. But they came out with the recommendations, and then from there, we've seen DORA come out with their first set of regulations a few weeks ago, and then the Department of Revenue also come out with their first set of regulations. And these are just draft regulations, so we're very early in the process. On March 8th, DORA, that regulates facilitators, had a stakeholder hearing about their set of regulations to get input about it. The Department of Revenue has a series of stakeholder meetings, one tomorrow, but a series of stakeholder meetings over the next 3 or 4 months, about different topics, with sort of the goal is to have all the regulations finalized by late summer or early spring, so the program can then go live, by January 1st, 2024.
Yeah, that makes sense. So far we've had 2 tranches of draft rulemaking, right? And then we have these broader recommendations which kind of allude to the topics that might come up in later draft rulemaking, right? So perhaps we should start by talking about the draft rules that have been published. I mean, I think key topics have been facilitator licensing and training programs and so on. So yeah, what are the big takeaways for the audience from this initial tranche of draft rules?
I can jump in on that one. So there's one thing to note that sets Colorado apart from Oregon is that Colorado included more specific language in the law protecting people with separate professional licenses. So for instance, a therapist, a licensed physician, to directly participate in the natural medicine program as facilitators without being disciplined by their other licensing boards. So that's one piece. And the proposed draft rules from the Natural Medicine Advisory Board and from DORA are actually creating or conceiving of 2 different license types that vary based on whether or not somebody has a separate professional licensure. So there's one license type that's a facilitator license. That's for somebody that is not licensed to practice psychotherapy and not licensed to practice medicine in Colorado. And then there's a separate license type, which is a clinical facilitator. And that is somebody who goes through the same training, applies for the license to practice with psilocybin. But in addition to that, they also hold a license to practice psychotherapy or medicine. And they can actually work with natural medicines to treat conditions that are within the scope of practice of their other licensure. So this is a really big difference from Oregon. In Oregon, in their rules, it's very clear that if somebody holds a facilitator license and is acting under that license, they cannot act under a separate professional licensure that they might hold. They have to really keep those separate. They can't, quote unquote, wear 2 hats at the same time. In Colorado, they very much can. So it's going to allow for, if this, ends up becoming the rules, it's going to allow for a lot more integration within Colorado's kind of existing health systems, and possibly people that are, primarily working as a therapist to be able to add this as something that they offer to their clients without it necessarily being, primary piece of their practice. And then there's also some restrictions on who, or proposed restrictions on who a facilitator, so a non-clinical facilitator, can work with. There's a few conditions that are categorized as essentially being higher risk for this psychedelic experience. An example is schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar. So the way that they're currently thinking about it, those people, if they're diagnosed with that condition, would either have to work with somebody who's a clinical facilitator, or they'd have to get some sort of clearance or referral from somebody who's licensed to treat that specific condition in order to work with a non-clinical facilitator. So that's one big piece. Josh, I don't know if you want to jump in on that or other elements of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, high level, this is a huge step forward for access in Colorado to allow natural medicines, and psychedelics to be integrated into our, existing medical and behavioral health system. However, it's like some of the details, cause us a little bit of concern, and one of the questions is, if you're someone who's been diagnosed with PTSD, should you be forced to go see a clinical facilitator versus like a facilitator that might practice in some psychospiritual modality that like better fits with you? Or maybe you haven't had any luck, in on the clinical side to date. So you don't, you want to work with more of an indigenous practitioner. And so there's, so there's some like issues, just, kind of around, the stratification of forcing people to see certain providers that, may or may not create problems. And likewise, it's like, part of the rules requires, even in the clinical facilitator world, to seek clearance from the person's treating provider, if they have certain conditions. And this functionally just does not work for folks who are veterans, whose treating provider might be the VA, who's, not, is bound by federal law. And, our whole program for those, mostly everyone knows this, but our program is in violation of federal law. Like we're creating access to a substance that's still a Schedule I substance that has no medical value according to the federal government. So, so there's these sort of issues in the mechanics that, need to be fleshed out a little bit for this to work. But big picture, the idea, the concept is huge, and big picture, there's like a huge step forward in creating like safe access, for individuals.
And have state medical boards expressed an opinion on this and said that they won't go after people who have licenses, or are they precluded from doing so by the act or by the statute, or is it kind of something that's yet to be seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's, the statute itself provides protections for license holders. Of anyone who holds a professional license, the statute provides protections that they can't lose their license for engaging in acts under the Natural Medicine Health Act. With that said, there's a carve out if they're operating under their license and they violate their standards of care or they commit malpractice. So it's not necessarily cut and dry, but there are some statutory protections for those who are following this law.
Okay, yeah, and for people on the call who are interested in becoming facilitators, what do the requirements, the training requirements, look like when compared to Oregon? Is it looking like it's going to take longer? Is it more stringent, less stringent? Are there accelerated paths for people who already have, for example, a license in Oregon?
Yeah, all of the above. No, so it's the Natural Medicine Advisory Board spent a lot of time looking at training requirements, and this is also something that the Healing Advocacy Fund did a lot of analysis around and actually presented to the board. They did start with Oregon's rules as a foundation and then look at areas to adjust those or potentially add things. And they did choose to add a few different modules, increasing the total didactic hours from 120 didactic hours to 150. So not a huge increase, but there's also some differences in the curriculum. The modules that they added are Intro to Trauma. That's one that came through in our analysis as being really important to support the capacity of any facilitator, whether clinical or non-clinical. Also Intro to Suicidality, a module on screening. So there's several areas that it differs from Oregon's requirements, more substantial or a longer module on ethics and program rules. And then in addition to those didactic differences, there's also so there's a 40-hour practicum that's required. That's the exact same, or it's similar to Oregon. It's not the exact same. And then they also added this consultation period, which is a minimum of 6 months of consultation where somebody is actively providing natural medicine services, and then they're working with somebody who is either a licensed facilitator themselves or has obtained this distinguished educator license. That has significant training and experience, who essentially works as a supervisor with them during those 6 months. And the idea there is to get more experiential learning where they're actually seeing what kinds of challenging situations can come up in a session with a client, whether preparation, during the experience, integration. and then talking that through with somebody who has more experience in training. And that person will actually be looking for competencies across a number of different areas. So thinking about physical touch, boundaries, ethics, this, therapeutic rapport, all these different pieces, and, ensuring that they are meeting those competencies in order for them to complete the training program. So that piece is really the most substantial difference from what we see in the Oregon rules. But I did want to mention that the training requirements are the same, whether somebody is a facilitator or a clinical facilitator at base, but there are a few accelerated options. So there's a legacy option where if somebody has been practicing with natural medicine for a number of years, right now it's a minimum of 2 years and a minimum of 40 sessions, and can demonstrate that they have comparable training in addition to that experience, then they could have an accelerated option where they can actually pass through the training period, but they have to show some kind of evidence of that to DORA. And then separate from that, there's a different accelerated option where if somebody has a separate professional license or degree, say they're a therapist or a social worker, and in the course of their training, they've completed a lot of these modules. Maybe they have intensive training on trauma, so the intro to trauma module would be really repetitive for them. They can actually also demonstrate that and pass out of certain modules, creating another accelerated pathway.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Josh.
You have anything to add, Joshua? Otherwise, we can move on to another.
No, I mean, I think the one other piece just to highlight is that there's a distinguished educator license that allows for sort of like a license for the trainer, like for those who are training facilitators, and it doesn't, it has a little bit less requirements, but I think the idea is for those who have been, quote distinguished or working in this field for some time, that they can come and be faculty for one of these training programs and provide facilitation services in that like practicum supervision model.
And that piece is kind of interesting too, because it also allows people from outside of Colorado to complete that, and potentially from other countries as well. So it could allow sort of more integration and actually acknowledgement of both like participation, but also, hiring of potentially people from more diverse backgrounds to participate.
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of gets around that chicken and egg problem as well, right? Who's going to oversee the practicum, right? If no one's actually been approved under this model yet. But yeah, talking about coming from different states and different countries, Oregon had some residency requirements, right, for operators, at least with certain licenses. Do you anticipate the similar sort of residency requirements in Colorado?
No, there isn't any residency requirements in Colorado. There is a statutory mandate that residence applications for licensure are prioritized, but there's no like hard residency rule. With that said, there is a limitation that an individual can't have a financial interest in more than 5 natural medicine business licenses in statute. With the idea of trying to keep these businesses a little bit smaller and not sort of lead to like monopolization.
Yeah, and that was similar in Oregon as well, right? I think it was 5 for service centers and 2 for manufacturers, right? I think. Yeah. And talking about other license types, obviously the first draft rules, at least from DORA, have mainly looked at facilitator licensing and training, which is presumably because they're expected to be finalized the first, right? So that we can actually have training programs launching in January, right? When the program starts. But behind that, we have all these other different license types, right? For presumably manufacturers and healing centers. So while we don't have draft rules, we have some recommendations from the advisory board, right? So do you have any comments on any of the tensions that have come up during the advisory board meetings on these other areas of future rulemaking, or any particularly exciting areas? Open floor.
Yeah, I mean, to go back a little bit to the DORA rules, there is a path for pre-approval of training programs. So there's this idea that before training programs are fully approved, they might get pre-approved so they can start offering classes and training sooner. So I think that's like a big, piece to note. So that's, to me, is really huge in terms of getting this program, up and running as soon as possible. And I think also, to note on the DORA rules, is that, is what they came out with is just the draft. We'll see like changes. We'll see another draft of the same rules come out, and then we'll see a draft of like what I call like the more juicier rules around facilitators. And this is, is telehealth going to be permitted for preparation or integration sessions? How many facilitators need to be in the room for group sessions or for one-on-one sessions? What sort of locations are there allowed? What, what are like the standards of care of a facilitator? Are there minimum, there's a big issue in Oregon of like, how long does someone have to be at a service center based off of the dose? Are there dosage caps? Like all of these like juicy issues haven't been really put to paper yet by the regulatory agencies. There has been, some of these issues have been touched on, in the draft recommendations. And on the draft recommendation side, I think like a couple things to note, is that there is like a pretty heavy code of ethics that we'll see, like, is that, brought into statute, or is that sort of like a standalone code of ethics? And there's some, arguably some changes that need to be made there. But it's, it's pretty thorough. One disappointing factor on the draft recommendations was this, and it's kind of ambiguous, but the recommendations seem to suggest that there shouldn't be really any extractions or of natural medicine outside of water and juice. And it's like, I don't know where like they decided like juice is like the right piece, but that's a little disturbing that came out from the advisory board. Hopefully that's not followed by any of the agencies, because I think it does sort of like it clearly contradicts with the licensing system that's set up in statute that allows for manufacturing facilities and allows for extractions. So that's like one point on the recommendations. Tasha, what's your thoughts on the recommendations?
Oh, when it comes to the recommendations from the advice board.
Yeah.
Wow, there's so many of them. I think of what is it, 70 pages of it, and I don't know where to begin. But yes, there's a lot in there. No, I think that they're very overall very thorough recommendations. Some of the pieces are just sort of directly taken from Oregon's program, especially when it comes to licensing healing centers. So they actually, the board went through and looked at each specific regulation in terms of kind of safety and emergency response and all of those, and said, hey, does this make sense? Should we adopt it as is? Should we adjust it? And they adjusted some of them, and then a lot of them they adopted as is. So I think we'll see, of course, how that translates into DOR's actual rules. But I wouldn't expect to see necessarily huge differences in terms of the healing centers themselves. That said, we also have this opportunity in Colorado for other locations to become approved for providing natural medicines that fall more within the healthcare realm. So potentially palliative care, addiction treatment centers, private clinics, private practices, things along those lines. And there's a sort of big open question of whether the licensing for that is going to be the same as for getting a healing center license, or whether there's going to be some way to recognize that maybe they have their existing sort of licensure and safety regulations in place, that maybe there could be a little bit more flexibility. So we don't have a lot of detail there. That's kind of one outstanding place where there's still a need for more either recommendations from the advisory board or for DOR to put out some draft rules, and we'll see how they look. So I think that's going to be a really interesting question, because one of the pieces in Colorado that is different, again, to Oregon, there's a lot once you get into it. So Colorado's law did not allow local jurisdictions to opt out of having healing centers. They do have, jurisdiction over zoning and things along those lines. But in practice, what that means is that we might see a lot more opportunities for rural access, which is really huge, because in Colorado, as in many states, we have really broad disparities in health outcomes across rural to urban. And there are a lot of people in rural communities advocating for safe, supported access. And so I think when we start thinking about some of the different location types that this might be able to take place at, and some of the greater flexibility that's built in also for potentially working with people in their homes in the case of palliative care or when there's substantial barriers to leaving the home, it also might open up opportunities for more statewide access, which is exciting.
Yeah, and talking of access, I mean, it's definitely not exclusive to the state regulated model. I mean, in these conversations, because in kind of biotech and drug development model, there's a lot of discussion now about, you know, how we're going to make MDMA assisted therapy accessible, right? When it could cost, you know, upwards of $20,000 for a treatment course. But yeah, we're seeing the same questions about Oregon and soon Colorado, right? How do you make these treatments accessible or make these services accessible in the case of the state models? How are you seeing that play out in Colorado? And what do you think the kind of key modulators of accessibility will be? Do you think it's, you know, how permissive the rules are on group therapy? Is it how expensive the training programs will be? What are some of those key kind of levers of accessibility?
Yeah, great question. I think high level, when we look at like the cost of services, there's going to be a direct correlation with the cost of services and the regulatory requirements and the lack of regulatory flexibility. And so, to Tasha's point earlier, if facilitators have autonomy to provide natural medicine services at pre-existing healthcare facilities or at people's homes, that will bring down costs substantially because you won't have the same capital costs of having, a fully licensed healing center business. Likewise, around those capital costs, if there's flexibility in the licensure of healing centers, you might be able to see healing centers co-locate with more broader mental health clinics. And I think there's a desire, amongst a lot of different people in this space of saying, hey, I want to provide MDMA at the federal level, and I also want to provide psilocybin at the state level. And how can I share resources there? Can I have a shared reception or record keeping or facility, or do I have to have completely separate locations? And if you have separate locations, then you just have increased capital costs, and that an increased capital costs are just going to increase the cost of services. So there is just like an overall like flexibility piece that is a big driver of the cost. And hopefully what we'll see here is like that we'll see more facilitator autonomy, we'll see more locations permitted, and that should drive down costs. I think to your point, the other lever of cost is group facilitation. I think allowing group facilitation is one thing that can decrease costs. There's a dream, but it's it's not fully baked. Of like, is there any way to provide insurance coverage for any of the wraparound services of preparation or integration? That hasn't been fully figured out, but that's like one way to potentially decrease costs as well. And then sort of like building into and we've seen this in sort of the DOR rules that have come out. They want every business to have a community impact plan, and that community impact plan, part of it is like, hey, how are you providing lower cost services to those in need? And so there's like a regulatory incentive for businesses to set up a sliding scale model or to create a program where they're providing lower cost services to certain communities. I don't know, Tasha.
I also think it's important whenever we talk about cost to acknowledge the things that currently are outside of not anyone's control, but maybe our direct control in the state of Colorado, which is, federal illegality is still a huge barrier, especially when it comes to tax liability and these businesses being subject to 280E. So that's, it's going to create challenges. There's also flexible there's ways that you can build flexibility into the rules to hopefully mitigate some of 280E. And I know in Oregon, they're coming up with all these creative business structures to really segment off the actual, trafficking quote of the Schedule I substance from everything else. And hopefully those pieces of the business or entities then can deduct taxes, federal income tax. But a lot of that remains to be seen. Liability insurance is, still quite expensive to the extent that it provides, protection, and that still is a work in progress as well. But when I think that it's also worth pointing out that there's a few pieces of the measure, both in Oregon and in Colorado, that are really geared towards access. And one of those is not requiring somebody to be a licensed clinician in order to become a licensed facilitator. And so that was done intentionally in both states because of the cost consideration, and then also recognizing that there are different pathways for people to develop the skills to really be a good facilitator. Being a good therapist certainly can help you develop a lot of those skills, but it's definitely not the only path either. And then also just recognizing that most places we have a shortage of these licensed clinicians, so broadening the opportunity somewhat for other people to get the training, learn the things that they need to learn to be able to do this. Those are all important pieces from an equity and access perspective. So we will see, some aspect of the cost remains to be seen in terms of the rules, but I do think that highlights something that Josh brought up earlier of like, to what extent should people with these different conditions be required to work with a clinical facilitator versus choosing to work with a non-clinical facilitator, also recognizing that there might be a significant cost difference there. To what extent should people be required to get medical clearance? Because the way that the rules are currently written, anyone who's taking or currently drafted, anyone who's taking a psychotropic medication of any kind would be required to get specifically medical clearance in order to work with a non-clinical facilitator. And that process in and of itself, if you're required to have a visit with a licensed physician, that's also can be quite expensive. So those are some of the areas that we're pushing them to think a little bit more carefully about. That is that necessary for all psychotropic medications? And we've had conversations with a bunch of psychiatrists and other physicians on this question. Of course, there's a range of different viewpoints, but a lot of people who work in the field of psychedelics think that psychotropic medications is fairly broad and not super well defined to have that level of requirement. And there's this question around, like, is that in and of itself a safety issue, taking the medication? Pharmacologically, it looks like there's not a lot of data to back up that taking a psychotropic and then taking psilocybin in and of itself is a safety issue. What it can do is it can either diminish or increase the effects of psilocybin. So there definitely needs to be education there in terms of how that plays out for the participant and how that could affect their overall experience. So that's one example of an area we're asking for them to take a little bit closer of a look to make sure and think about the access implications as well.
Yeah, I guess just like throw in one more piece there. It's like it's just an ongoing tension between cost and safety, and accessibility and safety, and so you see this tension come up all over the place. It's like, should facilitators be trained in 6 months, or should they have a master's degree? It's like a cost and it's an accessibility and safety tension. And different people fall in different sides of that debate. And I don't think there's like one that's right or wrong. I do think over time though, and we've seen this in Oregon to date, and I think we'll continue to see this, is like the cost of services will decrease. And that's just, as like an industry gets developed, and people figure out how to do things more efficiently, and and people can provide, like they can provide care to groups, or or they paid off their capital expenses. Like you can see like cost decrease over time. I think like we can expect that, in Colorado.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's lots to be worked out, lots to still be debated and decided upon. I mean, what do the rest of this calendar year look like in terms of draft rulemaking and kind of discussions and opportunities for people to get involved on the call? Busy.
There's lots of opportunities to get involved. Now is the time to get involved. If this is something that you care about, you want to participate in the future, what we do now will shape this program. So the specific opportunities, DOR has a number of working group meetings that are going to take place over the course of the next several months. The first one is coming up on March 20th, I believe, at 9:30 a.m. Mountain Time, I want to say. But they're all posted on the Department of Revenue's Natural Medicine Division website. And they will be releasing pieces of the draft rules prior to each working group meeting, a few days prior, so that folks have a chance to review those, identify any issues, and then actually show up to those working group meetings and comment on them. There's also the opportunity for written comment, and this is all Department of Revenue I'm talking about. Separately, DORA also has its process occurring. So they've had, as Josh mentioned, one stakeholder meeting so far, but the opportunity to submit written comment is open through their final rulemaking hearing, which is scheduled for May 3rd. So if you have comments on anything we've discussed today, take a look at those rules, send in your comments to DORA. They are really looking for feedback and input from the community to inform this process. And there will be a couple more pieces or chunks, as I'm calling them, of rules coming in from DORA as well on topics that weren't covered in their first set.
And what does it actually look like? Just quickly, sorry, Joshua, just quickly, but it can be quite daunting for some people, I think, to turn up to these meetings, or maybe I'm just shy. But what does it actually look like if you want to turn up and give comment? How long do you have? Do you have to submit something in advance? I mean, yeah, what does it look like in practice?
Well, so for the stakeholder meetings with DORA, you register in advance up until like the moment before, though, or even the moment it starts, I think. And then basically you raise your hand using the little, hand button when you want to talk, and they're just going to go through in the order of that people put up their hand and take comments and questions. It's a little interesting because they won't respond to you, at least on the DORA side. So it's not entirely conversational in nature, but they will read them and they will listen to the comments. The Natural Medicine Advisory Board had a meeting recently where they discussed a bunch of the comments that came through and thought about whether they would recommend changes based on any of those. So that's that process. I think, Josh, I don't know if we really know yet on the DOR side if it's going to be more interactive in terms of the structure. The meetings are longer for DOR. They're 3 hours. So that's substantial.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think like an easy way for folks who might be more shy speaking publicly is just to send in written comment. It doesn't have to be, your life's work and like lay it out in a white paper about a certain topic. It can be like something simple as just like an email, or you could forward someone else. You could say, hey, there's a report on contraindications, and like let me send this to you so you have it, and that's why like maybe this rule should be changed. Or like it's pretty easy to just like send in something on the written comment side, then they all become part of the record. And so like I think that's like really helpful. The meeting tomorrow, just like give people like a slight preview of like what to expect with the Department of Revenue. So they're talking about a bunch of very interesting topics from a business standpoint. One, so they put out an agenda and they have some questions that they're hoping to get feedback on. One is, should public companies be allowed to participate in Colorado's program? So that's sort of like a huge question on like on the business side. Especially for those who are entrepreneurs who might want to sell to a public company, or public companies who might want to participate. So that's like a big question. There's there's a good debate on both sides. There's questions around whether every employee needs to be licensed. There's questions around whether there should be outdoor administrative sessions. So like so literally like the Department of Revenue is like, hey, should people who are using psilocybin be allowed to be outside? Like that is the question they're seeking feedback from, and I'm sure a lot of people have opinions on that. So like all these different questions are like being raised, and you can just send in written comment. There's like a way to do that, or you can show up and participate, and it'll be, I'm assuming that it's gonna be like their listening sessions where everyone sort of has the opportunity to speak on like these various topics.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, Tasia, did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to add, I mean, I guess more on the Healing Advocacy Fund side, that we are also hosting a lot of conversations, both Zoom calls, in-person events in Colorado, to discuss a lot of these draft rules and ideas and bounce ideas off of each other and people that have different professional expertise. So we're also submitting opinions. We submitted a pretty detailed set of recommendations in the last round to DORA. And so, yeah, also just encourage you to come participate in those conversations, which is a little bit more informal, but can help support, like, broadly speaking, education, also inform our input and perspective in the process.
Yeah, that's great. Go on, Josh.
Yeah, and one more hot topic for tomorrow too is DOR came out with the requirements around community impact plans, and and that includes like how are you providing services to certain disproportionately affected communities, or is your business owned by members of these communities? And I think one thing that's like been top of mind for me is like, hey, the community impact plan should probably also take into account businesses that have some sort of indigenous reciprocity or benefit sharing or benefit honoring plan where they're giving back to indigenous communities that have been holding these medicines sacred for so long, and that's currently not in there. So it's like so trying to like expand the definition of like what does community impact look like, I think is like another big topic at this meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. I'm going to invite Sarah back after one more question. And my last question is, given that there's so much up in flux and so much under discussion, what should I say to all of the people that email me and say, oh, I want to open a healing center. What can I do now to prepare? Should they be getting involved in these meetings? Should they be going to Healing Advocacy Fund? Should they be speaking to a lawyer? Because I usually say to them, I'm in England, you need to speak to an American lawyer. I mean, but yeah, what can operators and people who want to be facilitators do to get prepared?
I would say definitely sign up for the Healing Advocacy Fund newsletter, which you can do on our website. We're giving a lot of updates, both related to Colorado and Oregon. We also have a running survey over Google Forms where we're just collecting information about people. People are submitting if they're planning to apply for a license. And then I mentioned when we're hosting these events and conversations, we are also inviting people that say, yes, I want to open a healing center. So starting to kind of create community there and give updates to those people specifically that might be a little bit different from updates you give to the general public. So definitely reach out to us. And then also probably hire a lawyer. I'll hand it to Josh.
Yeah, I mean, my shameless self-promotion is reach out to Vicente. We work with a lot of facilitators and legacy facilitators and potential healing center operators who are looking to best position themselves and their team to obtain a license. And putting my shameless plug away, I think there's a lot that can be done with individuals in the space who are looking to participate of doing the inner work themselves, and like engaging and starting their relationship with these medicines, figuring out their team, figuring out their values, their ethos, how are they going to get it back to certain communities, and that's all stuff that is needed regardless of how these regulations pan out.
Awesome. And we will, this is recorded, so we will have this for anyone that wants to listen or share with your colleagues. And we'll also get all the links that Tasha mentioned and send that out as well. So if you do want to participate and everything else, you can check out all of their websites. And thank you all so much. This was a great conversation. A huge thanks to Josh, and Tasha. We covered a lot of ground today. You can keep an eye out for future webinars, industry reports, and sign up for our newsletter at remindmedia.com and check out our business forum that'll be in Las Vegas later this year, and more announcements to come. Thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.